Traders don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because of how they understand it. At some point, discipline stops being a stabilizer and starts becoming a disguise, a way to feel in control without actually being aligned. I've seen this pattern repeat quietly, not with beginners chasing chaos, but with traders who believe they've already solved that part. They journal, they wait, they follow rules, and yet something keeps breaking. The paradox is subtle. Discipline feels like the answer, so it never gets questioned. When results stagnate, the instinct is always the same. Be more disciplined, tighter rules, less flexibility, more restraint. But restraint, when misapplied, doesn't create clarity. It creates internal pressure. At first, it looks responsible. You pass on trades. You wait longer than necessary. You follow your checklist even when the market context has shifted. You tell yourself, this is maturity. That patience is the virtue you were missing before. But slowly, the experience changes. You're not calm anymore. You're tense. You're not selective. You're hesitant. This is where discipline stops being a tool and starts becoming an identity. And identities don't like being questioned. You begin to protect the image of being disciplined more than the quality of your decisions. You hesitate not because conditions are unclear, but because acting feels like a violation. I've felt this personally. There's a specific discomfort that comes from watching a clean setup unfold and doing nothing, not out of intention, but out of fear of breaking your own rules. That discomfort isn't patience. It's suppression. And suppression doesn't stay quiet. It leaks. It leaks into late entries that feel safe because the move is already obvious. It leaks into reduced position sizes that don't match conviction. It leaks into sudden bursts of overtrading after long periods of restraint. This is the emotional whiplash few traders talk about. Too much discipline doesn't make you stable. It makes you brittle. When discipline becomes rigid, every decision carries more weight than it should. You are no longer responding to the market. You are managing your self-image. You start asking the wrong questions. Not, is this trade valid? But, am I allowed to take this? That question alone changes everything. Because now, the enemy isn't the market. It's your own framework. You begin to feel trapped by the very structure you built to protect yourself. And the irony is painful. The rules that once reduced stress now create it. The routine that once grounded you now feels heavy. Most traders misinterpret this moment. They assume it means they need more discipline, more structure, more restriction. But what's actually happening is something else entirely. Discipline has replaced awareness. Instead of observing conditions, you're enforcing behavior. Instead of adapting, you're complying. I've noticed that when traders reach this stage, they stop listening internally. Not to emotions, but to information. The body knows when something is off. The tension isn't random. It's feedback. But disciplined traders often pride themselves on ignoring feedback. They call it emotional control. That's the paradox. The very skill that helped you survive early chaos now blinds you to subtle misalignment. You're not reckless anymore, but you're not responsive either. And the market doesn't reward obedience. It rewards alignment. Before anything can change, this has to be seen clearly. Not as a flaw in character, not as a failure of will, but as a natural phase. Discipline isn't the destination. It's a phase of development. And like any phase, staying there too long creates its own problems. If this perspective resonates, consider subscribing or liking, not as a habit, but as a signal. This channel exists for traders who value clarity over intensity and structure over noise. Supporting it helps this way of thinking reach others, navigating the same tension. To understand why discipline can turn against you, you have to separate discipline from control. Most traders don't. They use discipline as a way to eliminate uncertainty. Rules become shields. Routines become armor. Early on, this works. Chaos decreases. Impulses get contained. Losses feel less personal. But over time, the market evolves. Your experience evolves. And if discipline doesn't evolve with it, friction appears. The mechanism is psychological, not technical. Discipline, when rigid, narrows perception. It reduces the range of acceptable action until only one behavior feels safe. That safety is misleading because markets are not static systems. They shift in tempo, volatility, and participation. A rule that protected you in one environment can restrict you in another. The disciplined trader doesn't notice the shift immediately. They notice discomfort first. A sense of being late, a sense of watching instead of participating, a sense that everything is technically correct, but something feels wrong. I've seen traders double down at this point. They assume the discomfort is temptation. They tighten rules further. This creates a loop. The more rigid the system becomes, the more pressure builds. The more pressure builds, the more emotional release is needed. That release often comes disguised as a well-reasoned exception. One rule breaks, then another, not because the trader wants to rebel, but because the system no longer matches reality. This is where discipline collapses suddenly, not gradually. From the outside, it looks like inconsistency. From the inside, it feels inevitable. The core issue is that discipline was never meant to replace judgment. It was meant to protect it. When discipline becomes performative, when you're following rules to prove something, it stops serving its purpose. True discipline reduces cognitive load. False discipline increases it. You can feel the difference. When discipline is aligned, decisions feel lighter. When it's misaligned, every decision feels heavy. The paradox is that disciplined traders often distrust ease. If something feels smooth, they assume it's dangerous. So they introduce friction intentionally. More confirmations, more waiting, more restrictions. They confuse effort with safety. This mindset often comes from past mistakes, overtrading, impulsivity, losses that felt avoidable. Discipline becomes a moral response, a way to atone. But markets don't respond to morality. They respond to context. A rigid rule doesn't know when conditions have changed. Only you do. That's why behavior engineering matters. Instead of asking traders to be disciplined, the better question is, what decisions should be removed entirely? Not postponed, not debated. Removed. Structure should eliminate low-quality decisions, not suppress valid ones. I use a simple internal test. If a rule makes me calmer, it stays. If it makes me tense, it gets examined. Tension is information, not weakness. The goal isn't fewer trades. It's fewer internal negotiations. When discipline forces constant self-monitoring, it's doing the opposite of its job. The paradox resolves when discipline becomes adaptive instead of absolute. Not looser, not stricter, clearer. Section 3, control, resolution. Resolution doesn't come from abandoning discipline. It comes from redefining its role. Discipline should shape your environment, not police your behavior. That's the shift. Instead of rules that tell you what you're allowed to do, you need constraints that define when trading is irrelevant. This is where a single, simple framework matters. One environment, one condition set, one reason to engage, not a strategy to extract profit, a structure to preserve clarity. For example, instead of rules like only trade X setups, the constraint becomes only participate when volatility and structure align. When they don't, there is nothing to decide. No temptation. No restraint required. This removes discipline from the moment of action and places it in preparation. I've found that the healthiest traders rarely feel disciplined in the moment. They feel prepared. The difference is subtle but profound. Prepared traders don't ask for permission. They recognize conditions. When conditions aren't present, they don't feel virtuous for waiting. They feel neutral. That neutrality is the goal. Discipline that creates pride is dangerous. Discipline that creates neutrality is sustainable. The strategic context here is intentionally minimal. One environment, clear invalidation, clear no trade states. Not trading becomes automatic, not heroic. This is how discipline stops being an enemy. It fades into the background. You're no longer trying to behave correctly. You're simply operating within a defined space. When discipline works, you forget about it. And that's how you know it's doing its job. If this helped reframe how you think about discipline, you're in the right place. Supporting the channel helps this quieter, more deliberate approach reach traders who need it. This is Layer Trader.